We're going to cover everything you need to know about the faceplate. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I'm going to help you understand everything you need to know about the faceplate. Now, the faceplate is a great way to secure a piece to the lathe, and it's relatively inexpensive. As a matter of fact, most new lathes come with a faceplate, and if you'd like, you can purchase additional faceplates and have them available for you. They come in a variety of different sizes, and many different manufacturers make them. For a long time, faceplates were the only way to mount a large side grain mounted bowl blank to the lathe, and that's because these scroll chucks, or I like to call them the four-jaw chuck, weren't around all the time. These came around in about the 1980s. The four-jaw chuck was introduced into wood turning from the metal community. Metal lathes use scroll chucks for a long time to clamp pieces in center and hold them centered on the lathe. And these were basically modified to be used for wood turning. Now, a four-jaw chuck like this is relatively expensive, especially compared to a faceplate. Faceplates are really cheap compared to a four-jaw chuck. And if you're just starting out and you're not sure if you really want to turn a lot of bowls, well, you could do everything you need to do with a faceplate, and we're going to get into that a little bit later in this video, so stay tuned for that. Now, many different manufacturers make faceplates, and you can purchase a whole variety of different faceplates. The only thing you need to match is your headstock specifications. Now, in my case, I have a 1" by 8 thread per inch headstock, and that's all I need to match up when I'm ordering faceplates. So I can purchase these from any manufacturer. It doesn't matter who's making them as long as they fit my headstock. So that's important to keep in mind. Faceplates are inexpensive enough that you can give them a dedicated task. In this case, I've created this sanding disc, which I've got a video all about how to make this right here. You might want to check it out. This is pretty cool. And I keep this faceplate mounted to this sanding disc all the time because this faceplate only costs like $15 US. It's not super expensive. So you can leave it and have it ready to go for one particular task if you'd like. That's what's so great about the inexpensive nature of faceplates. Now, a great reason to have multiple faceplates is to have different sizes. Now, the sizes are important for getting a good, secure connection to the lathe and supporting the bowl blank as you're turning. If I'm turning a small bowl, I'm obviously not going to use this large 6" faceplate. I might use something small like this, and vice versa. If I'm doing something large, I'm doing a nice big large bowl, I'm obviously not going to use a small faceplate like this. I'm going to go to something that's beefier and is going to give me a really good connection. Now, the rule of thumb for sizing a faceplate to your blank is about 1/3 the diameter. So in other words, if I were to attach a blank to this faceplate, I want that blank to be about 3 times the size of this. So if it's roughly this large, and I kind of eyeball this, you can measure it and make it very precise if you want and try to stick within that 1/3 range. But I've found that if you're using all the screw connections and you're getting a good flat connection to the blank, you can kind of sneak by with some larger pieces occasionally. You just want to be careful and make sure you've got a good connection and a good grip on the faceplate, and we're going to talk about that next. If you have a flat blank that has a nice flat surface, you can simply mount the faceplate right to that flat surface. You don't have to really do anything or think about it. Now, if you're doing a live edge or natural edge bowl where you're mounting the faceplate to that curved portion of the blank, then you really need to flatten the area where the faceplate will seat. It's very important that this is flat all the way underneath it and that it doesn't teeter and there are no gaps underneath the faceplate where it's connecting to the wood. Now, the way you go about doing that with a live edge bowl that has bark is you can chisel off that bark with a chisel and a mallet is the easiest way. Now, if you're going to chisel this off, it's really important if you're trying to maintain that bark for a live edge piece, chisel down and cut it in the center of the bowl. Don't try to strip it out. You may pull out a big section of bark and remove the bark on the area which will become the edge of the bowl. So you don't want that. You kind of want to work a small area that's just big enough to seat your faceplate, and that's it. Now, another way to remove that bark and flatten that curved area to seat the faceplate is to use a grinder with a cutting wheel like this. And I know there's a lot of you out there that don't like this. You've seen videos of people that have gotten hurt with these, and I understand, but safety is first. This is like any other tool. If you use it properly, you can get great results for it. And I'll explain to you why I like using this in just a second. The most important thing is to make sure you have this secondary handle on here. If you just have this grinder without this handle, do not use one of these. You have to have that additional support. And I'm probably guessing that the people that get injured with these don't have this second support, and they aren't using this properly. The other thing to keep in mind is let this come to a complete stop before you set it down. And this has, like any rotating tool, kind of like a router, there are certain areas on this where it's cutting and certain areas where it's pushing away. So if you don't understand where those areas are, then you can easily put one of the areas that's going to make it kick down and cause a problem. So like any other tool, follow all the safety recommendations and practice with it. Take a piece of scrap material and understand which corner is doing the grinding and the cutting, and just use that edge. Don't try to engage the entire cutting tip because it's going to want to kick back at you. If you're not comfortable with this, don't use it. But I also don't believe in completely banning a piece of equipment because of the stories of some people getting injured. Be safe with it, know what you're doing, be alert, all that good stuff. The nice thing about this tool that is really helpful is, especially when making a live edge bowl, you could chisel out a flat area with a chisel. However, you may notice that that area and the way that the faceplate is seating on there, it needs to be tilted just a little bit. So it takes a lot of effort to chisel out and readjust that flat surface so that the faceplate seats a little bit easier or better, so it's lined up with the grain of the bowl. But with this tool, it's really easy to quickly remove some more material and get the angle of the faceplate just right. That's why I like using this, because it does a great job of getting down underneath the bark and getting that surface made just the way you need to seat the faceplate. Something you really do not want to do is you do not want to put the faceplate on bark and then put screws through that through the bark. The problem is, even with thin bark, you're losing gripping material. Plus, you have the cambium layer underneath that bark. So you don't know how much material might actually be that bark material, and you may not have a really good connection into the wood. You want to be down into the sapwood or the heartwood of the bowl blank and not putting screws into the bark itself. That way you know you have a good connection. So that's why we want to remove that material and get this seated nice and flat. Screws are important, and we want to make sure we're using the right screws with the faceplate. Now, let me give you an example. This screw looks pretty good. If I put it in there, it's coming through, but guess what? This is too short. There are 5 threads that are visible there. That's too short. What you want is you want at least 7 threads. Now, you don't need it to be super long, but 7 threads is a good rule of thumb that will give you a good solid connection, and it will fasten that screw in there without it working its way out. Now, the other thing you do not want to use with a faceplate are drywall screws. Now, they look like they would work. It's plenty long enough. It's actually too long because it's probably, if you're doing a small bowl, this is going to get down into the meat of the bowl. It's too long, but that's not the real issue. The issue with drywall screws is these are made very inexpensively and they're relatively brittle. When the twists and the force of the lathe moves a bowl blank and puts pressure on these screws, they can be sheared off and they can break. The drywall screws, the purpose of the drywall screw is to be driven into drywall and simply hold it in place. That's all it's doing. It's not meant to have side pressure on it. So do not use drywall screws when you're mounting your faceplate. So which screw is best to use? Well, I like to use wood screws. Wood screws that have a diameter or a width that fits the hole pretty snug. There's going to be a little bit of play in there, but not much play because you don't want it to wiggle. And the length is at least 7 threads, which in this case it is. The other factor with this is These are stainless steel, so I can use them over and over. And they're a Robinson square head. Now, Robinson is a Canadian inventor that created these, and everybody in Canada let me know last time I was questioning this screw, but it's a Robinson screw. Make no doubt about it. That's the square head. The nice thing about the square head is they don't strip. And the other thing you want to combine with this is an impact driver to drive and remove these screws. Why? Because it doesn't strip them out. For the longest time, I was using Phillips head screws with a drill, a regular drill, and they would strip out. I almost never reused them because they would be stripped out after one use. The Robinson screws, I can use them forever. They are 100% recyclable. I rarely damage any of these. I keep a jar of them here. Basically what I did is I purchased a box of these, which were not cheap, but I can use them forever. And there's more than enough here that I need. They're completely reusable. And with the impact driver, they don't strip out. So it's really worth the investment of this. I know it's a little bit expensive, but when you see the results compared to a regular drill, you will be amazed. The other great thing about the impact driver is it will drive these screws into wet wood or hardwood, and it has no problems with this whatsoever. Sometimes when you put this into wet wood, the wet wood will grip the screws and really hold them in place. The impact driver has no problem pulling those out. The drill in the past would actually snap the heads off of some of the screws because it was gripping so tight from the wet wood, but the impact driver will pull them out every time. So it's really nice having an impact driver. And the Robinson screws don't skip and strip as easily as Phillips screws. So just keep that in mind as well. I'll put links in the description of this video below, and while you're down there, do me a huge favor and click that like button. Thank you. The way to mount the faceplate to the blank is to find the center of your blank first. And you're going to line up the faceplate with that center point. I like to just eyeball it and look through the whole of the faceplate and just line it up that way. If you want to be very precise, you can create a small little cylinder piece of wood with a pin through it so you can actually hold it in place and match up that center hole. And there are some companies that make some centering devices and that, but I've found that if you just look through there, you can pretty much line that up, look straight down into it, and then you tighten up your screws. Now, the way you tighten your screws is really important. What I like to do is I like to think of the way you put the nuts and tighten the nuts on your tire if you're changing your tire. You don't go around in a circle and tighten them all up, because if you do, then your tire is going to be tight on one side and it's probably going to wobble. The way I go about doing this is I will put one screw in place and I will bring it down to almost tight, but I won't tighten it. Now, why would I not tighten that? Well, if you're tightening it, especially with the impact driver, and you tighten that first screw, it has a tendency of twisting the faceplate. And now your faceplate's not centered anymore. So just set that first screw, but don't tighten it. Go to the opposite side of the faceplate and then put a screw in and tighten it. Now that one won't turn the faceplate because your first screw is holding it in the relative position. Then you can go back to the first screw and tighten it up and then go around the faceplate and add all the other screws. It's kind of like when we put the nuts on a tire. You can just make a star pattern. You're going back and forth across the circle so that you're tightening one side, tightening the other side. That way it's evenly pressed down into the bowl blank. Something else that's pretty important is to just snug up the screws. Don't try to drive them in there so hard, because what's going to happen is you're eventually going to strip that wood and loosen up that screw, and then the screw is not really holding as well as it could. So just snug them up and stop. Don't keep driving them in there, because those threads are going to turn and just bore out a hole there, and then that screw really isn't holding on very well. So we want to keep that in mind. Don't go crazy driving in really hard. Just snug them up and stop, and then put the next one in and snug that one up and continue. If the wood you're using is very dry or very hard, you may want to pre-drill the screw holes. It's going to make it a little bit easier to put those into the wood if you do that. And you're going to want to pre-drill those basically so that you're taking a drill that's about the diameter of the inner shaft of the screw minus the threads. It shouldn't be as wide as the threads. If you have it that way, it's not going to grip. Now, the other thing you can do if they aren't going in very easily, take a bar of soap. I keep this bar of soap in my cabinet. It's kind of dirty and nasty. I'll just run the threads of the screw on this soap, and that helps give it a little bit of lubricant as it's going in the wood, and it basically will go in a little bit easier. If that's not working, then pre-drill those holes. A best practice for attaching your blank to the lathe, once you have your faceplate attached, is to hold the blank still and turn the headstock wheel. Don't come up to the lathe and twist your bowl blank with the faceplate on it. If your bowl blank's large and you're doing that, essentially what can happen is you may not have those threads lined up, and you could damage the threads on your faceplate, or worse, you could damage the threads on your headstock. So instead, what you want to do is hold that bowl blank steady and line up the threads, and then gently turn the hand wheel for the headstock until it's snugged up. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is you want your faceplate to seat at the base of the headstock. If for some reason that doesn't happen, and this is kind of common with all the different manufacturers of faceplates and other devices that attach to the headstock, not always do they seat flat up against the headstock base. If that doesn't happen, the whole faceplate has the ability to shift while it's turning, and it can wobble a little bit. So if you think about it, those threads aren't so perfectly snug that there isn't some play in there, and they can move around. That's why you want the bottom of the faceplate up against the base of the headstock so it can't shift around on the lathe. If for some reason the faceplate is not seating all the way to the base of the headstock, you can use a plastic washer like this one. Now, I have a couple devices that don't seat all the way down to the base of the headstock on my lathe. So I keep this little washer. I found that I just keep it on the lathe all the time. Even my other devices that do seat all the way down, they'll come up snug up against this and they're secure. So I just keep this on the lathe. I was taking it off and putting it back on, and I would only put it on when I would use those devices that needed it, and I found that you end up losing these very easy. If these get down into your shavings, good luck trying to find it. So I just keep this on the lathe. The other thing you want to keep in mind is to check it periodically, make sure there's no cuts or scrapes in it and it's still perfectly smooth, because if it's not smooth or if it has a little notch in it, it's going to offset whatever device is up against that. So make sure that it's good and smooth, and you can keep it on your lathe if you want. Once you have your blank mounted to the lathe, you can turn this without additional support. In other words, the only attachment you need is that faceplate. However, that being said, it is always a good idea to bring the tailstock up and put that up against your blank while you can. So while you're shaping maybe the exterior of the bowl, use the tailstock in place, and that's going to just prevent any shifting of that bowl blank as you're turning. Once you get to the point where you're working the area where the tailstock is, you can remove that, and you have this complete open space. That's the nice thing about using a faceplate, is you can attach something to the lathe with just the one connection. Where most spindle turnings are turning between centers, where you have something that's essentially pinned between the headstock and the tailstock, and it has to stay that way the entire time. If one of those connections comes off, then the piece is no longer attached. That is not the case with a faceplate. The nice thing about the faceplate is you have the one connection and you have full access to the exterior of that connection. So you can do anything you want around the base of that. But again, use the tailstock for extra support, and keep your lathe speed within the reasonable amounts, especially when turning bowls. If you're coming from spindle turning and getting into bowl turning, the speeds are dramatically different for safety reasons. And I've got a video all about that. You're really going to want to check that out. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, the four-jaw chuck or the scroll chuck has not been around all the time for wood turning. Prior to these chucks being available, the only thing we had was a faceplate. We had to attach bowl blanks to the lathe using a faceplate. Now, the way that is done, and the way this still can be done if you would like, again, if you choose not to purchase a four-jaw chuck initially, I highly recommend getting one of these eventually. If you're going to turn bowls, these are a very quick and very fast way of mounting and unmounting pieces, and that's one of the reasons why they're so popular. But if you don't want to do that yet and you want to save a little bit of money, you can do glue blocks. Now, the way a glue block works is you essentially attach a piece of scrap wood to a faceplate. You can turn it round into a cylinder shape if you want, and ideally this is a equalized or relatively dry piece of wood that's not going to shift and move a whole bunch. But you're going to have a piece of wood, a blank that's going to come out on this. Again, you're going to use screws to attach it, just like you would to your traditional bowl blank. But then you can attach a larger bowl blank to that by gluing it to that faceplate. Now, you can do this in a variety of different ways. You can use a glue block and then glue a blank to the glue block, put that on the lathe, keep it mounted to just this faceplate, shape the exterior in this position using the tailstock for support, and then scoop out the interior and do it all from one connection if you really wanted to. It's not so easy because you have to work backwards on the exterior and then work the interior. The other way you can do this is you can attach a glue block, attach your bowl blank, shape the exterior pretty much the way you see me shape the exterior of my bowls, and then instead of switching it around and putting on a four-jaw chuck, you can create a recessed area or a tenon and then detach the first connection and then create another glue block and reattach it to that base that you created on the bottom of the bowl, mount it to the lathe, and then do the interior of the bowl. And as you can imagine, doing the glue blocks and waiting for glue to set up and trying to match that and center it, it's a little bit challenging and it's definitely time consuming, and that's why the four-jaw chuck is so popular, because you can quickly make those connections, detach the piece, turn it around, and keep working. So you're not waiting for glue to dry. But again, that's something if you're just getting started and you're not sure if you want to turn bowls and do it a lot, it's kind of nice to be able to experiment with just the glue block and try a couple bowl blanks. Typically, after you've done a couple bowls and you become addicted to it, then you're going to want to save your money and get a nice four-jaw chuck, so you've got the convenience of mounting very quickly versus the glue block. Now, there is another connection that is similar to a faceplate. It's called a ring plate. I don't use ring plates. I know there's some people that do. Essentially, a ring plate is designed, it's kind of like a donut with a beveled edge that's designed to have a four-jaw chuck expanded in the center of it and mount to the lathe. Now you might be thinking, well, why not just use the four-jaw chuck? Well, the advantage of a ring plate is it adds an additional surface area that's wider, that is screwed into, you can screw and attach it to the blank just like you would a faceplate, and then you have the connection of your four-jaw chuck. Where this is beneficial is if you have a smaller chuck and you're trying to do a larger bowl, that ring can give you a bigger diameter of surface connection and expand your range of possibilities. Now, like I said, I don't use the ring plates, but they're worth exploring if you're interested in that. I'll have links for that, like I said, with all the other products that I've talked about here in the description below, so you can check that out. Hopefully this video has answered all of your questions and concerns about the faceplate. The faceplate is a very secure way of connecting a bowl to the lathe. As a matter of fact, I hate saying things like this, but I've never had a bowl blank come off a faceplate ever. I probably will now that I've said that, but it's never happened yet. So it's a really secure connection and it's very affordable. It's a very inexpensive device for attaching bowls to the lathe, so keep that in mind. And if you do have any questions, please leave those below and let me know what you thought of this video. Hopefully you liked this video, and if you did like this video, click that like button. Thank you, I greatly appreciate that. It helps the channel, it helps everything, and I appreciate you for doing that. Thank you. Be sure to check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything you need to know about turning wood bowls, including online courses that you can sign up for and start right now. So check it out, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy turning.